You got to wear your collar with dignity. How it burn out.
Black is beautiful.
I said, sing it along.
Black is beautiful.
Say, I'm black and proud. It's my time that we get rid of that old slave mentality.
While you look, listen, and learn.
It grieves me when a black sister or brother ridiculously pulling down one another. The contents it may have the remarks we make, like if it's only Africans who does make mistakes. Some even go as far as to say that black people will never ever see the way. But when a black man keep a black man off of the shelf, he automatically keeping down his own self. Like you're telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Redistribute the bad days of slavery, where so much Africans was killed by Mussolini. Jack the Ripper and Hitler were not black men. What did they have one black man who was bad like them? So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they go kick we out and in dance. Hey! Love yourself first.
Papa, come here, you play.
Or soul searching.
It's just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will keep me on the line. Hey! Those of you who have some form of education, impart your knowledge to help your brother man. Don't assassinate his character, only to prove that you are superior. Not like the MP for Tobago East, who always describe his people like beasts. He always this man, he loved to attack, like he vexed with the father for making him black. Like you're telling yourself that you're self-alone. Ask yourself if you think it the way you should. Redistribute Marcus Garvey, Makanda Daga, and Walter Rodney. And respect yourself in all that you do. Nobody in the world will do that for you. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because we go end up lasting in that. Keep a black man off of the shelf, he automatically keeping down his own self. Like you're telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Redistribute the bad days of slavery, where so much Africans was killed by Mussolini. Jack the Ripper and Hitler were not black men. What did they have one black man who was bad like them? So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they go kick we out and in dance. Hey! Love yourself first and take some examples. All the other races that live with the people, they are united. They treat the women sacred. Any disrespect, they will be aggravated. So unfortunately, hear what you must do. Try your best to treat your people the same way too. Help a brother or sister if they're falling down. And don't laugh when you see them flat on the ground. Like you're telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you think it the way you should. BNM supporters can't treat me go. I wonder why they want Patrick Malley to go. But the other races is thinking this way. They wish man they stay until resurrection day. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will kick me out the yard. Hey! Those of you who have some form of education, impart your knowledge to help your brother man. Don't assassinate his character, only to prove that you are superior. Not like the MP for Tobago East, who always describe his people like beasts. He always this man, he loves to attack, like he vexed with his father for making him laugh. Like you're telling yourself that you're self-alone. Ask yourself if you think it the way you should. It is tribute, Marcus Garvey, Makanda Daga, and Walter Rodney. And respect yourself in all that you do. Nobody in the world will do that for you. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because we go end up lasting in that. Most people was in sexual history. Many face domination and treachery. It even happened here in the Caribbean. Caribs and Arawaks were enslaved to extinction. So we got to take example. If we want to progress as a people, read history so we could unite and fuse and stop using slavery as an excuse. Stop telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Job said women breeding in garbage. And the old black brothers, swines and savages. But why is he walking wrong, talking this rubbish? No Indian will say that about rubbish. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Look, try and learn fast. Job, try and learn fast. Because fast will put a kick in your ass.
I'm the Lord Kitchen.
My name is Winston.
Calypsonians.
And a very good evening to you. Welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, coming in today with Give Your Own Self a Chance, Black Man and Black Woman. Powerful calypso by the late Winston Henry, the explainer. Some of you will remember him as the Rastmas Man. The man who gave us Lorraine, giving us a serious one day, Black Man Black woman, give yourself a chance, because if you don't give yourself a chance, they're going to kick we out the dance, or we're going to be last in the dance. Don't ridicule yourself. Don't ridicule your people. Love yourself. Marcus Garvey, self-love. And we are on a mission. We are on a mission. We're on a mission to make sure that Black people give themselves a chance in Guyana, because if we don't give ourselves a chance, nobody else will give us a chance. They are trying to kick me out the dance. Explainer is being prophetic. They're trying to kick me out the dance. Every time we try to advance, they're blocking us. Black man, give yourself a chance. Love yourself. We are a diverse people, but we don't have to be fragmented. We don't have to be fragmented. We live in a society, in a country in which racial identity is very much part of our process, very much part of our culture. We didn't make it so. And we can't wish away our racial identity. To wish away our racial identity is to wish away a whole big part of our history, our culture, and our identity. And identity matters. What do you identify with? That is what identity is about. What do you identify with? Black man, Black woman, give yourself a chance. 2023, they're trying to kick me out the dance. And we got to stay in the dance. And we are on a mission. And that mission is to make sure that the Black man, the Black woman in Guyana do not feel that anybody is better than us. We are not supremacists. We have never been. We have fought against supremacy, equality. It is no accident the first African organization that was formed in Guyana's post-colonial history was an organization called the African Society for Racial Equality. African Society for Racial Equality. That is what we have always been about being equal. But we got to start by loving ourselves, holding on to our brother and sister. And those of us, as Explainer says, who have some education, we have to use that education to lift our people. So welcome to Politics 101, wherever you're joining us from. We're so glad always to have you, because we're on this mission together. We've just come out of the emancipation bubble, and we're extending it to the Emancipation Month. And part of giving ourselves a chance is that we've got to plan. We've got to plan. In the old days, they used to say there were two tendencies in human society: emotionalism and reason. And even some Black theorists said that the African, the Black man, was driven by emotion and not reason. We are driven by both emotion and reason. Our emotion arises out of our reasoning, and our reasoning arises out of our emotions. Our emotions, of course, are driven by our experience. And that is why part of the methodology of Black scholarship and Black activism is about going into the Black community and getting a sense of their experience. I happen to teach in a Black Studies department. And what is Black Studies? It is a study of the experiences, the study of the experiences, the study of the experiences of our people, wherever they are, and taking that experience, and as Guyanese say, refining it and giving back to the people as a source of political nourishment, cultural nourishment. So when Padre G was coming up with a plan, because you always think that we don't have a plan. You know, we bought acres and acres and acres upon acres of land, and we turn those lands into villages, and those villages transform the coast from the wild coast into a civilized coast. We don't have a plan. People without a plan can do that. But you see, they always make us out to be people who are driven only by emotions. We get vexed today, and tomorrow we gone back to normal. So, that plan. We have a plan for the African in Guyana. And if we have a plan for the African in Guyana, then we have a plan for Guyana. Because the African is integral to Guyana just as other ethnic groups. And the African experience, as we have been learning during this emancipation period, is central to understanding Guyana and the Caribbean. Our region, not because we want it to be so, our region has been shaped by that experience of forced labor, bondage. It has shaped everything. Our music, our dance, our prose, our education system. The fact that today African language and African culture is not part of our curriculum in the schools has to do with that experience of slavery. A reluctance for us to reconnect in a structural way with our roots. So tonight we continue our discussion on the plan. The plan that Padre G the organization that arose out of the decade that the United Nations has set aside to deal with the inherent, the structural, the institutional challenges to Black people as Black people. Do other ethnic groups have challenges? Yes. But the African challenge is unique. Of course, there are challenges we share with other racial groups, ethnic groups. But our challenges are unique because they arise out of a unique experience that has spawned a set of social, economic, and political relations that have remained with us to this day. Those relations have infected our politics, our economics, our cultural reflexes. How many times have we not heard our people, African people, say, I'm Guyanese and not African? You will never hear an Indian say that. Not because Indians are better than us, but because Indians are more grounded in their indigenous culture. On the other hand, we Africans were cut off from our indigenous culture. And so when a civic culture appears before us, we mistake it. We mistake it for our indigenous culture. We are Guyanese, but we're also African Guyanese. The Jamaicans don't have to say Afro-Jamaicans, or the Antiguans don't have to say African Antiguan, because the state in Antigua, the society in Antigua, is synonymous with the cultural identity of the peoples of those countries. Here we have a state that is presiding over a multi-ethnic society. And insofar as the state has to promote identity and culture, it has to promote all identities and all cultures. But because we are so divided as a society, when we have one government in power, that government allows the state to promote the culture of their political constituency. And when Africans have power, because Africans were cut off from our indigenous culture, we adopt a kind of universalist approach, as Dr. Jeffrey said last night. And so Black governments, none of them in Guyana has really promoted at the level of the state African culture. We have one holiday, emancipation. Even America do better than us. They got a whole month, Black history. We got one day in a society in which we make up half the population. Our East Indian brothers and sisters got before Diwali, Pagwa, Idul Adha, Yumanabi. Our Amerindian brothers and sisters get a whole month, Heritage Month. We got one. Because when our African leaders are in power, they do not privilege African culture for good reason, because they don't want to seem to be racial. But when the other group is in power, they privilege Africa. Just turn on the radio stations. There's more chutney and Indian music. Nothing is wrong with that. But where is our Shantu, our Kwekwe music, our real roots Kaiso? No play on the radio. The agents of socialization in the country are not promoting African culture. Black man, give yourself a chance. That is why we have to have a plan. Because everything is designed to kick we out the dance or to make we last in the dance. So the apology is here again for us to continue our discussion about the plan of action. My words, they may not call it that. The plan of action to integrate the African into the quote-unquote mainstream of Guyanese society as an integral part, not as a marginalized part, as an integral part of Guyana. So we've got Itpadaji back. Let's bring them in. Let's see here. We have Sister Olive Sampson. Good evening, Sister Olive.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us back on here, Dr. Hinds. Really appreciate it.
And Dr. Thomas Gittens, my old teacher. at the University of Guyana, and they're back. And remember, we started this conversation about 3 or 4 weeks ago on the plan, because we have a plan. We have a plan. And there are six aspects of that plan. Dr. Gittins, how many have we covered thus far?
First of all, David, thank you once again for having us on. Olive, good seeing you. And I'm happy to be here. And hello to your audience out there, David. To respond to your question, we've done 3 so far. And to remind our audience, the strategic plan has 6 strategic objectives: economics, employment, education. We've finished those 3. And the remaining 3 are, in this order rather, equity and equality, expiation, and we'll explain those later on. And the last one is dealing with the capacity building of EPADG and sister and partner organizations. Capacity building is this one.
Thank you. Equity and equality, so important to the discourse. Tomorrow night at Buxton, we have a symposium there under the theme centering racial equality in the age of oil wealth in Guyana. And we have a big panel there. Most of you by now know the panelists, quite a few of them. And then on Sunday at 1 o'clock, tomorrow night is going to be 6:30 in Buxton at the Tipperary Hall. Please come if you can. We also will be live streaming. And then on Sunday, Coffee 250, they have their Emancipation Forum, their 10th State of the African Guyanese Forum. And they're also dealing with the question of equality. Their theme is the one-sided one Guyana, exploring the one-sided one Guyana. So those are 2 very important events that you should attend. You should attend. So tonight, we are setting the stage here for those discourses with that part of the strategic plan, equality and equity. Sister Olive, before Dr. Gittins comes back in to walk us through the plan, why this equity and equality? Why are they so important for EPADG and for African Guyanese in general?
It's an excellent question, David, because equity and equality are really fundamental to civil rights and justice. As you know, the theme of the decade is recognition, justice, and development. Without equity and equality, we cannot have justice, development, or recognition. We have to be seen and to be dealt with as equals in the society. And given our history, we have to demand that the history be recognized, the legacy of our enslavement be recognized, the legacy of colonialism be recognized, and that in doing so, one has to ensure that we bring our people up to the point where we are on par with, and that all of the inequalities of the past are addressed, and that we are able to stand on the same footing, on a level playing field with all other groups. You know, one of the things we have to remember, it pains me, and I really liked your introductory calypso. It pains me when I hear our brothers and sisters, my brothers and sisters, speak about the lack of business acumen in our community. African Guyanese, they don't do business. You know, we walk off the plantation, we went to government jobs, but it was not that cut and dried, because we were major producers in the economy. We were the major producers, but we were not given, as you know, David and Theo, we were not given the opportunity to sell directly. We had to sell through commission agents. That was ordered. That was put in place to prevent us from succeeding as business persons. We were not given the licenses, etc. And so when you look at that history, at no point did anyone ever step back. Although I think there was one period in our history when there was an effort to ensure that equity. But the point is that out of that lack of opportunity, out of that deliberate placement of obstacles to our success, we find where we are today, not having the breadth of engagement in the entrepreneurial sector as we would have had it not been stunted deliberately. And so this question of equity, equality is fundamental to the achievements of the goals of the decade, all of them. Recognition of our history, equally recognizing our contribution to the establishment of this state. Fair treatment, equitable treatment under law, in the rule of law. Equitable treatment where it comes to the development of our society, development of human development and development in all sectors. So that is what I see, and that is what Hipadaji sees as critical to our full enjoyment of our rights as citizens in this society.
Thank you very much, Sister Olive. And of course, those of you who are familiar with some of the terminologies in the study of African people, Black people, we would know of equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, that what matters more is that there must be equality of opportunity. But there is a third term that we must add, and that I've introduced here in this program, and that is equality of condition. Because if your condition is at a certain, we know that in Guyana, if you don't have the necessary capital to invest when they are giving out contracts, because of your condition, your capital-less condition, you are not able to get the same opportunities as others. So we're walking this thing through, as we say, and you all say so, not me. Part of what we're doing here is we learning and teaching. So if somebody said, well, your equality of opportunity, tell them, oh no, equality of opportunity is not enough. Your condition has to be one that makes it possible for you to take advantage of the opportunities. My brother, my former teacher, I saw your sociology teacher the other night, and I told him we were talking his name on the program. I'm talking about my countryman, Michael Paris. And he whispered in my ears, he said, I'm proud of many of my students, and that's one. So he's proud of you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, David, it's my turn, I believe.
Yes, your turn.
Okay, excellent. I note you haven't read the strategic objective as you normally do, so could I invite you to do that? I mean, I like.
Yes, you over to you. I talk a lot already for the night.
Okay. All right. Strategic objective number 4 deals with equity and equality, and the objective reads as follows: reduce systemic and structural inequities and inequalities in access to economic opportunities, goods, and services. And we talked about that a moment ago. Restore conditions of equity and equality in relations between African Guyanese and other ethnic groups. We talked about that also. address and remove inequities, and inequalities to access to justice and treatment by the courts, law enforcement, and prison officials. Combat racial profiling and negative stereotyping of Africans. Promote equity and equality in the expression of religion in public meetings and spaces. And restore hope and confidence in the African Guyanese collective and youth in particular through the realization of equity, justice, and development. It's a mouthful, but the strategic plan, as it is constructed, focuses on each one of those subset of, if you will, issues that are embedded in that strategic objective. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty to the outcomes and the outputs and activities, I think it would be useful to sort of break down the two concepts you're looking at here. And in fact, both Olive and David, you've begun to do that. Equality and equity, what do they mean? They're not the same, although they relate to each other. Equality refers to, in a legal sense, where all persons, and the US Declaration of Independence puts it nicely, all men are created equal. It relates to that formal equality of all persons, all human beings, equality in terms of our humanness, equality in terms of our rights, equality in terms of our right to participate in the activities in our societies, etc. So equality is that formal legal concept, meaning each person has the same or equal right as the other person. It's also expressed well in the concept of one person, one vote, where each vote is seen as equal. Now that is fine. And as a means of organizing society and indeed of aspiring to organize society, it is a good goal to aim for, that all should be equal. Because that means that irrespective of our gender, irrespective of our ethnicity, irrespective of our status in society, irrespective of our age or whatever difference is, we all have same or equal rights, and we have the same or equal status in terms of before the law, etc. So that's the formal sense of equality in that legal sense. Equity, however, and David, I think you and Olive have alluded to this, equity is a concept that is needed because societies are not perfect. And indeed, the history of our societies in the Caribbean, Guyana and the Caribbean, the rest of the Caribbean, is the history of, in former decades, as it were, way back in time, the history of slavery or enslavement of persons from Africa, out of which arose conditions of inequality, where the society itself ordained that some were better than others. Slave owners, so to speak, were supposed to be or were held to be superior to their property, the slaves. And out of that situation of, if you will, a formal inequality, that has thrown up a number of inequities, meaning lack of equality as a systemic and as a structural way in which the society operates. So equity refers, therefore, to how each, both individual and community or group, how they benefit from, how they participate in, how they benefit from what the society has to offer. And that has a lot to do with history. It has a lot to do with geography also, where we are located physically in the society, whether we have access to and how much access we have to whatever goods and services and opportunities there are in that society. So in a real sense, equity, as we're speaking about in the Guyana context, in the current context, refers to not simply that people are formally equal or that people have formally equal access to and opportunities there, but the fact that that is not the case. That in many instances, people do not have equal access to goods and services or to opportunities. And therefore, we see that there is an inequity in the distribution of goods and services and in the allocation or access to opportunities. What is required, therefore, in a formal sense, therefore, in the developmental sense, is to restore some balance. and in that sense to address the inequities and to try to produce a society that's more equitable, you see, where people, both at the individual and the group level, are able to share in a more balanced way in what the society has to offer by way of opportunities and goods and services and development opportunities, etc., etc. The challenge of African Guyanese coming out of enslavement, and as I think David and all of you put it, the history of the post-emancipation period is one in which our development was stunted, deliberately stunted. In many ways, it was actively discouraged. Our ability to engage in the market was actively discouraged in favor of others. And I won't get into that history here. But the fact is that in the post-emancipation period, our forefathers and our mothers encountered significant situations of, as it were, discrimination, legal, institutional discrimination in the way the society, the colonial state was established and was maintained. And so what we have today are the survivors of that, and the survivors in a very strong sense, in that those systemic issues have not gone away. They're still there. They're still, in a real sense, militate against the ability of our African Guyanese brothers and sisters to achieve as much as we can and should, to achieve real equality in the society. So I just wanted to make those opening comments in terms of, as we were explaining what we mean by equality and equity. Equality is one person, one vote, shall we say. Equality meaning legal equality. Equity, however, speaks about the share we have, how we're able to share in, and the extent to which we receive our fair share in what society has to offer. And how do we then achieve that fair share? And much of what we are going to be talking about in the Strategic Objective 4 speaks about how we address the questions of equality, of achieving that equality, and also, perhaps more importantly, or equally important at least, how we ensure a fair share of African Guyanese in what a society has to offer. So let me go straight into it. Let's start off with the Strategic Objective 4, which I just read, and start off with the first outcome. The first outcome deals with, and it reads as follows: African Guyanese enjoy equality of access to socioeconomic opportunities and services, and equity in their share of state assets and the benefits of national development vis-a-vis other groups and races. So equality of access to socioeconomic opportunities and services, and equity, meaning the fair share in state assets and the benefits of national development. And the output there is, as you recall, I'm speaking directly to our audience here, David. A strategic objective consists of a strategic plan consists of the objective. That is what you're trying to achieve. What is the change you're trying to achieve? And I just read the change earlier on. The outcomes, what it is that in specific terms you want to achieve. And then the outputs now will speak about what it is that will lead to that. What are the building blocks of that change? And then the activities are what it is you have to do to get to where you want to go. So the output is what I'm coming on to now. And these are policies, laws, programs, and actions implemented to expand access and reduce inequities in development benefits of African Guyanese. Straight to the crux of the matter. Policies, laws, programs, and actions that are implemented to expand access and reduce inequities in development benefits for African Guyanese. And here I must pause to make the point that much of what we're going to talk about here in terms of policies, laws, programs, etc., are actions not at the individual or even at the group level, but these relate to actions at the societal level, meaning what the state or the government and various levels of state and government need to do to actually get us to where we need to be. So policy is in a level, policy and laws, etc., all is at the level of the state. In that the state is the one that ultimately has that authority. If it's a legitimately established state, it has the authority to pass laws, to implement programs, etc., to then lead to Yes, to then lead to the change that we want to achieve. And so the role, the essential action that we take as a community, those actions by and large and predominantly have to be at a level of advocating for what we want or what we believe that is due to us. So you'll find that a lot of the activities, a lot of the outputs and activities under this outcome have to do with advocacy with various elements of the state. Some have to do with the governmental apparatus itself, whether it be the ministries, in terms of trade or justice or economic development or what have you. The actions and the advocacy that we must take to ensure that we get our fair share, whether it be access or whether it be equity, etc. It has also a lot to do with the advocacy in terms of some practices that we consider to be not to our benefit. Much has been said about the way the legal system operates, the way the system of policing operates, the way the prisons operate vis-a-vis persons of African descent. During the consultations that led to or that inputted into the development of the strategic plan, there were lots of concerns raised by the communities. As I've been paid to stress, what we are putting out here are not things that we came up with as a team, and therefore we decided that we are the ones who will then be the ones to determine what it is that the African Guyanese communities want. We went to the communities and asked them what they wanted. And so a lot of what we will be saying here in terms of issues of access to justice and equal justice, etc., those came out to the communities through the consultations we had. Okay, so in a real sense, a lot of this has to do with what with us approaching those who control the state, those who have state power, those who have control over the various arms of the state, the ministries, and etc., those who administer justice, whether through the judiciary or those who are in charge of law and order in terms of the police, and those who are in charge of the prisons and the treatment of persons who are incarcerated. How we approach them, we need to approach them in such a way as to say, hey, these are some of the issues, these are some of the challenges, we would like to have these addressed. And that's what we call advocacy. So a lot of what we're doing here is advocacy. All right, so now on to the activities. Under that first output, we talk here about partnering with relevant Afrocentric organizations on the enactment or strengthening of policies and programs, for example, dealing with actions and programs on affirmative action to ensure non-discrimination, particularly as regards access to social services. Now, this is a critical area. Social services, whether in terms of whether it be the old age pensions, whether it be in terms of housing, education, healthcare, etc. The fact is that sometimes you need both programs and policies put in place, but then in terms of achieving equity, we also need affirmative action. Affirmative action, in some instances, to ensure that we get at least the access to these goods and services and these social services. We also talk here.
If you may pause here,
sure.
Please explain for us affirmative action,
Indeed.
what it means, and apply it to Guyana, because as you know, with these terms, they can mean anything and everything, depending on where you sit, where you stand. Right? Sure. So what is affirmative action? Its general meaning and its application to Guyana.
All right. Affirmative action, and I hesitate to say this, but it's a very popular concept, very much under attack, frankly speaking, in the United States of America, where it has been recognized that persons of African descent and indigenous persons in the U.S. society have suffered, as we have suffered, the people in the Caribbean have suffered from the onslaught of slavery, enslavement, and discrimination and exclusion, etc. And so affirmative action is intended, meaning, and let me explain affirmative action first. Affirmative action means programs and policies and actions that are then put in place to address whatever are the challenges, whether it be in housing, whether it be in education, whether it be in access to economic goods and services, whether it be in terms of being able to get into certain organizations, etc. Those are the areas where the barriers are put up, and affirmative action is there intended to reduce and remove those barriers through certain types of policies and programs. For example, in housing, you would have a certain quantity rather of housing put aside for low income persons, and of course you have a means test to establish that you are indeed low income, and therefore you have access to that particular benefit in society through in housing. In our context in Guyana, and I was talking about the US at that point in time and other societies, in our context in case of Guyana, affirmative action would have to do with, and we saw a lot of that, David, when we talked about the strategic objective dealing with economy, where one of the areas, for example, is in our producers, whether it be in agriculture, but also our business persons who would want to be vying for state contracts, where they are allowed, not allowed, where the barriers that are put up, that are there for qualifications, for example, to get a contract, those are maybe reduced and can be reduced. Where in the first place, as we all know, in our constitution, there's a 20% of all state contracts that are set aside for small producers, small persons, contractors, etc. Now that is an expression of affirmative action, where you have a set aside for persons in a certain category. Again, the important part there, however, is the extent to which there's real access, whether the affirmative action is actually carried through, whether the policies, etc., allow for those persons to access 20% of contracts. And unfortunately, we're hearing that that's not the case. Even though the Constitution says one thing rather, the policies and the procedures, etc., and the requirements do not allow for easy access to that 20% of contracts. And so that element of affirmative action is not happening, or is not happening as it should, or the extent it should in our context. And so you have, again, affirmative action meaning action that attempts to address a disability or a barrier that a community might face in accessing whatever it is, whether it's education, whether it's contracts, whether it's housing, land, etc. In other words, policies and processes and other actions that, in fact, allow persons who are otherwise disadvantaged to have access to that particular good and service. So I hope I explained it.
Olive, let me bring you in, because affirmative action is the name given to the concept that Dr. Gittins just explained. And sometimes you hear those who are trying to kick Black people out of the dance say that we advocates, we lift the Black American experience and impose it on Guyana where it's not relevant. I mean, I sometimes have to hit myself for not screaming when I hear such nonsense. Reducing slavery and colonialism to a national event rather than a global concept. And I want you to address that, Olive. How affirmative action, the concept is not just American, but it's a global concept, wherever Black people and other people who have been subjugated find themselves.
Absolutely. And it's sad to think that anyone would not see that the impact of the transatlantic slave trade, the impact of colonialism, and in the United States, if one were to speak, since the United States period of colony ended very early, the point is we had the period after the emancipation, after the Civil War, right? The period of segregation and a
Jim Crow.
period, Jim Crow, etc. Well, we had that in Guyana. We just did not call it that. And
That's
we
right.
had it all across the world. And one only has to go back to the recognition of nations across the world in the Durban Declaration and Plan of Action that spoke to the legacy of enslavement and all that came after it. The subjugation of people of African descent did not end when the shackles were removed from our ankles and from around our necks. It has continued even until today. I think former President Granger, in remarks for emancipation this year, spoke to the fact that emancipation is an ongoing process. When we speak of this, there are so many obstacles in our path that still exist. One of the major obstacles is just the way people perceive us. The immediacy with which people perceive that we are somehow incapable of performing at levels that all others can perform. And actually, if one were to really step back and pay attention, we would have to admit that given the obstacles that have been put in our path all these centuries, it is amazing that we are where we are today. And whenever we are given the opportunities, how we, with just a small opportunity, how we succeed and the amazing things that we have been able to accomplish. And so affirmative action is indeed required in all of across the diaspora, where we find that people of African descent who have been subjugated and continue to be oppressed can only come out of that through affirmative action and creating a setting where they're given a fair chance to succeed. Even as we dismantle the stereotypes and all the other, and even our own internal thinking of the way we think about ourselves, even as we get rid of mental slavery, we have to have affirmative action.
We have to have affirmative action. Professor Clive Thomas once remarked at an ACDA conference that we can do all the things that we ask ourselves to do. Lift up, black uplift, we can save, we can do all the things that people say we don't do. At the end of the day, as this professor here tonight, Professor Gitton said, if the state does not intervene, you are not going to break the structural impediments. So that self-reliance and so on is about survival. But to move beyond survival, that is to break the chains to break the impediments, the state has to become involved. Back to you.
But if I may make one further point, just if you give me the opportunity to do that, just to say that what is important about affirmative action, that it's established by the state, but in everything, even though there may be a law or a policy, citizens have to hold government responsible, have to hold their feet to the fire. Legislation might be in place, but we have to be the ones that demand that it be implemented, that it be implemented consistently and across the board, as we see in the fight, in the struggle in the United States, where affirmative action is constantly under attack. And we saw that in the recent Supreme Court decision. So we in Guyana must call and demand and really hold government's feet to the fire to establish affirmative action policies at the legislative level. This 20% rule is one, to see that it's properly implemented, but across the board in so many other ways. Whether it's from tractors for farmers to have tractor pools, you can give us land, but if you don't help us with the resources because we don't have, how do we ensure a level playing field? Affirmative action.
Affirmative action.
And we dealt with a lot of that, as mentioned before, in the economy part, where we talked about, development banks. They need to put in place again access to concessional financing through development banks and agricultural banks. We talk about equipment pool for producers and so on and so on. Okay, Just sort of, David, going back now to this particular output, and then to remind ourselves, it talks about policies, laws, and programs and actions implemented to expand access and reduce inequities in development benefits for African Guyanese. We were talking about action, affirmative action in terms of housing, social services, education, etc., etc. That particular output also requires advocacy and partnering with the Ministry of Labor, for example, to ensure that there is enhanced protection for workers' rights, etc. As we know, in a situation where the workers are vulnerable, and we have, unfortunately, we have been seeing that more and more in Guyana. And I know of cases where people have been dismissed, one would say without cause and just willy-nilly, for whatever reasons the employers feel that they need to get rid of them. But without a strong Ministry of Labor or Labor Department to look over workers' rights, and African Guyanese workers are no less discriminated or no less subject to arbitrary treatment. Again, it's important to have that facility in place with the Ministry of, or that support, the Ministry of Labor. We talked about, again, the 20% of government contracts where we need to work with the Ministry of Finance and the Procurement and Administration Board, the ministries, etc., to ensure that there is tender reform and that, in fact, African Guyanese contractors, etc., are able to tender and to access whatever funds and whatever development works are ongoing. And there's a lot of that happening these days, we know, with billions being spent on infrastructure and so on and so on. And then the commercial banks, credit unions, other lending institutions, so ensure that they offer favorable and non-discriminatory loan and other policy, loans and lending policies, including collateral requirements, etc. Some time ago, one of our African Guyanese business persons lamented. This is a fairly established business person, lamented that the commercial banks were not inclined to give him loans as opposed to others. And that's the kind of inequity that we're talking about under this particular strategic objective. And again, we talk about here partnering with the Ministry of Culture and the Finance and others to address the problems facing African Guyanese, for example, in the areas of, in the communities where the Ministry of Culture and Education and others have to look at in-depth studies of African Guyanese communities to understand the issues there and how they address those issues. Communities are not without their challenges, like every other community. And so there needs to be a lot of attention there. Again, effective land distribution mechanisms with appropriate and legitimate representation of people of African descent. There have been the complaints that we heard, and I think continue to hear, about land distribution policies not being equitable or balanced. Again, as I said, I'm reflecting what we're hearing, what we heard, but then to the extent that this is being said, then it has to be addressed. Improving drainage and irrigation in African Guyanese villages and communities. As we all know, this has been one of the challenges going way back in the immediate post-emancipation period when our ancestors established villages. And the problem ranged from deliberate flooding of those lands so that they will be forced back to plantation work as paid or on the paid one to say laborers, to, in fact, neglect, just simply neglect. They were not seen as an important constituency, and so they were just neglected, and the villages were left to deteriorate, etc. That has continued to some extent, to a large extent, some would say, and so there needs now to be specific action, if not affirmative action, in the sense, David, to ensure that our villages are brought back to the levels of production which they enjoyed and productivity which they enjoyed, and which it can, in fact, still attain. This particular output speaks also about working with the Ministry of Health, in addressing issues, health issues that affect the African Guyanese population. As we all know, there are certain non-communicable diseases that we are very much open to or much afflicted by. Diabetes and hypertension and those kinds of NCDs are unfortunately rather common in our community. And so we need to work here with the Ministry of Health to ensure that, in fact, appropriate attention, this is part of the equity now, appropriate attention is paid both to the African Guyanese community as it were, having a peculiar predilection to these kinds of diseases, but also in our communities, that the communities themselves, the villages, etc., are addressed through education, through public information, etc., to ensure that they are equipped to address for themselves these health issues. And here again, David, it's not only the state and its institutions that have a role to play, but we ourselves have a role to play. In this case, in ensuring that we protect our health and that we are able to live healthy lives. And this also talks about programs in HIV and AIDS and in the non-communicable diseases. It talks about other diseases such as tuberculosis, malaria, diabetes, etc. Essentially talking about addressing these kinds of challenges in the African Guyanese community that in some ways are peculiar, though we share them with others. But the fact is that because of where we're located, for example, in the inner city areas, where we all know there is overcrowding, there is poor sanitation in many instances, no access to running water, limited access to running water, and so on. Those are some of the issues that address inner city communities where our populations live. I mean, Georgetown, for example, is about 1/3, if not close to half of the population of the country. And a large percentage of African Guyanese live in that urban, peri-urban Georgetown area. And so it's important, therefore, that the Ministry of Health in this instance, and also the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development and the other ministries and agencies play a very critical role in ensuring that we uplift the standards in those communities. And this takes advocacy, and this is what this particular objective is all about. Okay, so I just wanted to move on quickly, if I may, David and Olive, to the next outcome. The second outcome under the objective 4 deals with, and I read it here, African Guyanese, especially youth, enjoy greater equity and equality of access to justice before the courts and fair treatment of law enforcement and correction officials, consistent with national and human rights legislation and norms. Now, this particular challenge or issue, if you will, of access to justice, equality and equity and access to justice, and fair treatment by law enforcement and correction officials, etc., came up quite frequently in the regional consultations. And I think there's no secret. In a sense, there is much anecdotal, if not solid evidence that there are inequities in the way African Guyanese are treated in terms of access to justice and the courts and law enforcement, etc., etc. I wouldn't go into the reasons for this, although we all, I think, have our thoughts on the matter. But the fact is that to the extent that this is the case, and the communities and the regional consultations seem to indicate that it is indeed the case, that there is the feeling, and where feeling comes in, as we say in Guyanese parlance, where there is smoke, there must be fire. And so there's the feeling that all is not right in terms of access to justice and the way the justice system treats African Guyanese and the way the law enforcement treats African Guyanese, especially youth, and the way they are treated in prisons, etc. So the output here is effective measures implemented to address and remove inequities and inequalities in access to justice and treatment before the courts. In other words, we need specific measures and including policies, legislation where needed to address the question, to in a sense address and then to remove inequities and inequalities in access to justice and treatment before the law, before the courts. And there are a whole series of activities here. I wouldn't go into all of them, but I think we could all. I'll just give you a sort of a taste of some of what we have here as activities. Working with the Ministry of Labor, of Legal Affairs, Ministry of Legal Affairs, for revised legislation on equal rights and full implementation, Again, working with the Ministry of Legal Affairs in terms of training for persons in human rights who are in the administration of justice. And these are soft interventions, but in fact, a lot has to do with in fact ensuring that the conditions for equal access and equal treatment are there. Therefore, you have to work both with the system in terms of the laws and legislation, etc. But you have to work with the people who manage the system, who populate the system. And I think it's fair to say, starting from very top, judicial officers through to the court system, through to the police, etc. There's need for, if not training, then sensitization in terms of how they deal with people, different persons coming before them. We know, for example, if you are well heeled, as expression goes, if you come with a bag full of, well, not a bag, but if you come with the appearance of being a person of substance, if you come with the appearance of a person who has influence in the society, if you come to the courts with the appearance of someone who is, quote unquote, up there, then the treatment is in many ways different than if a person comes who looks scruffy, who seems to be a nobody, an entity, etc. And so there's that unequal treatment before the law. And so this particular output speaks about ensuring equal treatment before the law and non-discrimination in that sense, whether because you may look as if you're not part of the ruling elite or what have you, but the fact is that this should not be. There should be equal treatment before the law, and a lot of the activities under this particular output, as I mentioned before, a lot of them speak about working with the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the court administration, working with the Bar Association and lawyers and etc. to, for example, provide free or minimal costs for legal aid and representation before the courts, because many persons go before the courts and they don't have the deep pockets to afford one of the fancy lawyers out there, the well-known lawyers who command significant fees. And to the extent that you don't have resources to then fight your case in the courts, the legal system does not, in that sense, afford equal access before the law and equal treatment under the law. Treatment is the quality of treatment, unfortunately, in too many instances, depends on your ability to pay for it. If you don't have the ability to pay for it, then in many instances you don't enjoy it. So that's one of the inequities where there's lack of fairness. One of the inequities that we have to address in this particular output, where we talk about, for example, not only the institutions that dispense justice, but training for persons who are there managing these institutions, and also working with other support organizations, institutions such as the legal aid societies, the Bar Association, etc., to in a sense provide services to those who are unable to financially afford those services in accessing justice. So this particular output speaks about that, and I note here we also have, and this is of course one of the concerns of our Rastafari brothers and sisters, the whole question of legalizing or decriminalizing, I should say, decriminalizing possession of small quantities of marijuana and the removal of social sentences for persons. In this case, mostly African Guyanese, in this case, might be convicted of possession, etc. So those are some of the actions on that particular output 2. The next output deals with implementing and removing inequities and equalities in treatment before law enforcement, community policing, and prison officials. I already touched on this in many ways, so I wouldn't go into that much detail. But there is again, there is the often aired complaint that law enforcement does not treat all persons equally, and there are complaints about persons being able to access the law enforcement and I'm being careful in my language here, being able to develop a relationship, shall I say, with law enforcement based on their ability to provide services, goods and services to law enforcement. I think I'm being delicate enough there, David.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, boy.
And to the extent that you don't have the ability to pay, then unfortunately your treatment is different. And so this particular output speaks about those kinds of issues and how they address them. And a lot of it has to be in training. A lot of it has to be in appropriate supervision and management of these institutions. A lot of it has to be in ensuring that that complaints authorities and mechanisms work as they should, and so on. And again, a lot of the work that Ipalaji and others have to do in this regard really is work in terms of advocacy and partnering with these institutions to ensure that their policies, that their activities, that their ways of dealing with persons of African descent are significantly changed for the better, so that there's equity, if not equality, in access to justice. So that's what this particular output speaks to. Outcome 3 speaks about African Guyanese encounter significantly reduced incidences and situations of racism, racial profiling, and negative stereotyping. Now, this is a whole complex of issues. Reduced incidences of racism, racial profiling, and stereotyping. Unfortunately, again, in the consultations, persons in the communities spoke to what they saw as racism, what they saw as African Guyanese being subject to different treatment because of race. I mean, a very common one, frankly speaking, and I won't go into details because I don't think we want to go there. But in terms of, for example, the price you pay in the markets.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
The price you pay in the markets. If you are of a certain race, you pay more. If you're a certain race, you pay less. So this is the perception, as I said. But where there's smoke, there's fire. It also speaks about how, for example, they relate to the or how they are integrated into the labor market, and to the extent, well, not to the extent, there was a complaint that their wages and incomes may be different depending on who they are in terms of ethnic background as opposed to others. And so there are those inequities and inequalities in the system that are based on race. And I think, in as much as we would not like to privilege and to put up their race because it's seen as divisive, I think to the extent that the consequences of race are still with us, then you have to address it. You have to address it. And so in many ways, this particular outcome speaks to address those issues of profiling, etc. We all know the stereotyping is still with us. I do recall my school days, and that was some decades ago, where they did chance that the school children, the kids would hurl at each other. In other words, describing each ethnicity in not so favorable terms.
Yeah.
That was a reality, unfortunately, of the 60s when I was at school, and perhaps it's because of that, of the history of the 60s, but it was there, and I am not sure that has disappeared. So there's still stereotyping. I mean, all of you refer to it that Black people can't do business. That's a stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
That's a stereotype. And so there's a lot of that. And so this particular outcome speaks about addressing those instances of situations of racism, racial profiling, and stereotyping, negative stereotyping. And a number of activities. The output there is to ensure that there are effective measures implemented to reduce these incidences. And how do we get that? Then a lot of it has to be working with the Ministry of Legal Affairs to strengthen, reinforce effective national human rights institutions. The whole question of the Human Rights Commission that is really not really working as such. the Ethnic Relations Commission as a body that's supposed to address some of these issues. A lot of the actions in this particular under this particular outcome relate to working in those institutions that are there to reduce incidences of racism, racial profiling, stereotyping, etc. One of the other things that it mentions here that in fact we're very strong on is in fact having mechanisms of monitoring. And so there's an activity that speaks to working with the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the Ethnic Relations Commission for implementing mechanisms for monitoring and eliminating racism district. And this includes having what are known as observatories, which in fact collect information. One of the challenges and one of the, if you will, the negative descriptions, frankly, that can be hurled against our official policies that there seems to be a reluctance to collect data based on the ethnicity. But the fact of the matter is that if you don't do that, then you don't know the extent of the problem.
Yes.
And if you don't know the extent of the problem and where the problem is, then you cannot devise solutions to address the problem. So one wonders perhaps whether this is deliberate, that people don't want to know that there's a problem or want to recognize the problem or what. But the fact is that we need to collect more data, solid data on these issues. Because what happens, unfortunately, and we've seen it in recent past, is that, those on different sides of the divide, so to speak, hurl, accusations against each other, and it's a to and fro, basically, without the benefit of having solid data to say this is indeed the case or this is not the case. So there's some actions here for documenting incidences of racism and profiling, etc., for establishing an observatory to actually monitor and put together and publish data based on what comes out of the court system or comes out of whether with law enforcement, etc., because people may appeal to law enforcement to address their issues. And the final action, and I skipping to the last one on this particular outcome, is talking about working with the Ministry of Legal Affairs, the ERC, and others for a full implementation of the recommendations in the reports of UN Special Rapporteurs and the report of the African Union Study Tour Mission. Now, in speaking with the Ministry of Legal Affairs in preparation of this strategic plan, I was concerned to learn that there are no mechanisms for follow-up, for implementation and follow-up on the recommendations of these UN special missions. The McDougall report, as we all know, Gabe McDougall was there, and then there was Do the DNA, they're all in the early 2000s. Some serious work was done in that regard based on the challenges that the country faced in the early 2000s, what I think former President Granger referred to as the Troubles. And that led to these UN missions. They came and they spoke with a wide range of persons. They prepared the reports with I think, voluminous reports with significant recommendations for action. Nothing happened. So once again, if nothing is done based on these serious studies, then we're not addressing the problem. Yeah. We can't wish the problem away. So this particular outcome 3, ends with establishing mechanisms in the relevant agencies for the full implementation of the recommendations of these UN reports, etc.
Tell you what, Dr. Gittins, let's pause there. We'll wrap up this section, and then when we come next week, we'll pick up there because
I was going to say, David, at the very last one. I mean, I'll just take 2 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Outcome 4 speaks about equality of religion and observing religious.
That's important.
Yes, it's important, but it's a simple one in the sense that I think we know what we're talking about. As a multi-ethnic society with 5 or 6 different religions, and it depends on how you count them. We have to ensure that no single religion is privileged over the others.
Yes,
because that means that is in a sense is discriminatory. None is better than the other. None is more worthy of attention than the other. And so this particular outcome essentially speaks to that. And some of the actions can be taken to address the question of unequal treatment of the various religions. And I mean, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. We also have to recognize the other African religions that are there, and they should be given equal treatment. So I just wanted to state that very simply. It's the final outcome, very critical one, very important in terms of establishing cultural and religious equality.
Yes.
And in a sense, also addressing the iniquities rather, that afflict our society. And this is all historical, because we know that the Christian religion, for example, was privileged over all others going back in time. So I will pause. I will end there in terms of my outline of the strategic objective dealing with equity and equality. I hope I haven't rushed it. I hope it's been as clear as I had intended to. And with that, David, I hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. And the last thing that has to do with religion is so critical in terms of sense of self and identity and so on. Olive, will you give us a wrap on this strategic objective?
Yes, thank you so much, David. I just wanted to say very quickly, just to point to some of the things we've done, but also just to make a final statement. Our members at General Assembly passed a motion for calling for the decriminalization of marijuana in 2019. And we took that to the Ministry of Legal Affairs in 2019. And so that Ipadaji stood with the Rastafari community, as members of our community, on that issue, calling for the decriminalization of marijuana. One of the issues that we have also dealt with as central to this whole question of equality, it goes back to our history. It always goes back to history and an understanding of that history. And so for us to be treated equally, one has to recognize our contributions to Guyana and its creation. And so the recognition of our history through the teaching of history from across up until the tertiary level is one of the demands that we have made. And it also guides very many of the programs, conferences that we have held, support for member organizations and their events, sending speakers and so on across the country to understand that. Second, another area with respect to equities is the right, it has to do with rights and the land ownership and the protection of our particularly ancestral land. Our work to see the village councils resuscitated was a motion that was passed by our annual general meeting, our General Assembly, and taken to the Ministry of Communities. I was observing some of the comments, and I just wanted to wrap up by saying a couple of things. One, that all of the advocacy work that Ipadaji, that communities, people in their communities raised with the team that was led by Dr. Gittins. He spoke to all of these areas that require advocacy, might have been led by Ipadaji, but that is the work of citizens in a democracy. The citizens in a democracy come together through institutions like Ipadaji to give voice to their demands, right? An institution like Ipadaji, an umbrella organization of now 67, we've added two member organizations, we're now 67, can come together and give voice to those kinds of demands in terms of our advocacy. And so I really want to stress here the role of citizens in a democracy. Political parties have their role to play. Civil society, representing citizens, has a critical role to play in demanding the kinds of things that citizens voiced in the community meetings that Theo and his team held across Guyana. And so I want to really urge folks to listen to these and to feel empowered to support institutions like IPADG in making these demands for disaggregated data, disaggregated by ethnicity, so we can begin to address where these weaknesses lie. Where is it required that governments step in and take action for equality and equity? I want to point out, because someone made the point that that there is the contractors, small contractors, are not covered by affirmative action. In the United States, they come under an 8A program that has been well established and in place for over 30 years, maybe 40 years. So I encourage that person to read about that 8A set-aside program that has seen small businesses in minority communities and across the country really rise and grow because they were given the kind of level playing field that would help them. And we can do so. We can do that in Guyana. So IPADG's work reflected the concerns of the community. And they were about not only providing equity and equality to people of African descent, but everything that Theo read about today will just lead to a better country for all Guyanese.
Yes.
This is for an improvement of our country. And so we must pay attention to this and take away the nonsensical sort of notions of, the human race is the only race, etc. The point is that people are experiencing discrimination. You cannot tell a person that their eyes are lying to them, that their experiences are not genuine. They are genuine. People are being discriminated against. We come out of that history. It's woven into the fabric of our community. And right now we're trying to dismantle that and create a fair and equal society, a society where everyone feels respected and everyone has a fair chance, not to take away anything from anyone, just make it a fair society. So those are my final words, Dr. Hinds.
Theo, anything that you may have missed or you wanted to say that you forgot to say, your closing thoughts?
Okay, just to, first of all, I would want to endorse precisely what Olive said a moment ago about the fact that we're trying to develop a society where all share equally. And this is not only about one ethnicity. But beyond that, just to mention that equity and equality, in fact, run through all the prior three strategic objectives that are, in fact, we looked at. In terms of the economy, we talked about equity and equality there, employment and education. And so in as much as we have a separate, as it were, strategic outcome, strategic objective dealing with equity and equality, we recognize that these are also embedded and intertwined into all the other areas, all the other E's that we talked about earlier on, and that in fact make up the strategic plan. E meaning the letter E, economy, education, etc. So I'll close there by reiterating that that this is all one of the same piece, shall we say. It is merely a part of the fabric, and the fabric has to be seen as a totality. And so equity and equality, very critical, but very much part of that totality. And I leave there until next week.
Dr. Theo Gittins, Sister Olive Sampson, here this evening, walking us through the plan. I call it the action plan for African Guyanese. IPADG as the representative collective organization of 67 African Guyanese organizations, 67 African Guyanese organizations. So when they speak here tonight, they are speaking for more than a critical mass of African Guyanese. But more importantly, what they're saying here tonight and what they've said before and will say in the coming weeks, because we have 2 more objectives to deal with, they are reflecting the thinking of the people in the communities. I want to stress this. This is not IPADG talking on behalf of itself. IPADG talking on behalf of its organization, but more importantly, the plan arises out of democratic consultations with the people in the African Guyanese community. You know, when our foreparents were buying the villages, they did exactly that. You would be amazed at the kind of consultation and the back and forth and argument. You know, we do a play in Boston called The Promised Land, written by Brother U.C. Guayana. And, you know, Gangang was always there when the younger ones were getting heated, and she would bring the thing back. Picnic, Bush Gatties, are you hear me? All right? There was that democratic consultation. And Ipadaji has continued in that tradition, and it's something that as a people of African descent, we want to hold on to. I'm not saying that we have to learn it, hold on to it, because I think the democratic ethos, insofar as it exists in at a theoretical level in this country, it came out of the anti-slavery movement, and it therefore was no accident that when those people bought their lands and set up their villages, they were meticulous in terms of recognizing equality and equity. Meticulous the way they divided the farmlands, etc., etc., etc. So thank you all very much, Olive and Theo, for coming on.
Thank you, Dr. Hinds, and thank your listeners.
Thank.
And as usual, I have tremendous faith in you all. Later on, perhaps in another couple of minutes, I'll be on Mark Benshop tonight. And next week, we're going to have Ipadaji come back to deal with the other objectives. Tomorrow night, in Buxton, centering racial equality in the age of oil and gas. You're going to hear a lot there. Big team. Royce Ford, Nigel Hughes, Simona Brooms, Nigel London, GHK Lal, David Hines, and I'm missing somebody. I'm Vincent Alexander. It's a big team. And we're going to have a robust discussion there tomorrow night in Buxton, as we continue to plan. And then on Sunday, Coffee 250 is going to be holding their State of the African Guyanese. And they also have a big panel there. Nigel Hughes will be there. I will be there. Paul Slow will be there. Don Holder Cush would be there. Vincent Alexander will be there. So we have a weekend coming up of robust discussion. So tomorrow night, we're not going to be here with Politics 101. We are going to be coming at you live from Buxton at that forum. Thank you all very much. And for those of you who are going across the Mark Benshop, I'll be there in a couple of minutes. Love you all. Love.
If you hear that, black is beautiful. Santa Claus.
Black is beautiful.
It's a texture. Lift your head like me. You got to wear